righty, so let me repeat myself just one more time and we'll call it good. So Seattle Friends of Fission welcomes all of you to our first online event. You can probably tell it's our first. We're going to get it together here. I'm Paula King, and we started Friends of Fission because solving the problem of global warming presupposes the need for vast amounts of nuclear power. And when considering the need to build nuclear power, the question of nuclear waste often comes up as a roadblock. It's like the big question. So tonight, Dr. Jim Conca is going to tell you many things you may never have heard about nuclear waste. And he's worked in the field of, we have noise in the background, gang. Jim has worked in the field of nuclear waste for over 30 years and writes a weekly column on energy and the environment. Sounds like he's got a really interesting column coming out. I believe he said tomorrow. He may mention that. Yes. So you can send questions in the chat, and we'll have lots of time at the end to talk about questions. So do send lots of questions. Okay, I'm going to mute. Jim, you're on.
Great.
Okay.
I appreciate this. And this is actually, for Washington State, it's a key issue. Of course, we have all types of nuclear waste in this state, more than most other states, period. So I'm going to talk about what's happened to our nuclear waste disposal program, because something did happen to it. It was on track a while ago, and then it got majorly derailed from politics. So I want to, myself, Conca, and Dr. Judith Wright, my spouse and colleague, we've been in nuclear waste for the last 35 years, handled all types of waste, nuclear, biological, which is really nasty stuff, and chemical waste. And nuclear waste is the easiest to handle, actually, and there's the least amount of it of anyone else. So let's kind of get going. At the bottom of the screen, you can see my Forbes site. A few years ago, Forbes, because I took someone on a tour of nuclear waste, an editor from Forbes, and they said, "You want to write for Forbes?" And I said, "That's interesting, kind of weird." So I've been doing that weekly and talking about nuclear and energy issues and climate change and everything else. It's been interesting because it's not the way scientists usually write. The first one, the editor said, "Jim, you sound like Wikipedia. Could you get some attitude?" So now I have attitude. So sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. So let's kind of dive into this. There are 4 categories of nuclear waste in the United States, going from highest activity to lowest. Spent nuclear fuel, which is pretty much a solid metal. It doesn't leak. It's not liquid. There's nothing. It's just a solid. It's hot, but it's very solid. It comes out of commercial nuclear power plants. After 6 years, you remove a nuclear waste bundle after 6 years of operation. High-level waste is the weird stuff at Hanford. That's the peanut butter-like junk in the tanks over here that everyone talks about, the tanks. High-level waste, by definition, is only defense waste. It's only bomb waste, okay? Spent nuclear fuel is not high-level waste. It's high activity, but it's not high-level. High-level waste is only bomb waste, by definition, and it's hot bomb waste. Transuranic waste is the other large category. It's also bomb waste, but it doesn't have a lot of the fission products. It's not quite as hot, although some of it is as hot as other high-level waste. In fact, some of it is hotter than anything left in the Hanford tanks. But it's generally mainly plutonium, americium. It's that bottom row in the periodic table that no one ever remembers the names of. And it's pretty much bombs, because bombs are made of uranium, plutonium, and a few other things. So that's the transuranic waste. No one ever hears about that. And then there's low-level waste, which is just junk. It's not very hot. Some of it comes out of hospitals. Some of it comes out of contaminated soil and things like that. And there's a lot of that, but it's just not very hot. So for deep geologic disposal, you have to have a deep geologic repository for the top 3, for spent nuclear fuel, high-level waste, and transuranic waste, by law. Now, Washington State has all 4 types of this waste, especially true and high-level waste. So in order to understand waste, we have to do a little short primer. So I'm going to kind of run through this, a short nuclear primer. Uranium-235 splits easily. Fissions, it splits. Uranium-238 does not split easily. You mine uranium, just like you mine and smelt iron ore. Natural uranium is 0.7% 235. You need 235 to make things happen because it splits easily. So most of your natural uranium ore is almost all 238. Nuclear fuel for a reactor, for power, you enrich that to 4%, 5%, depending on the design of the reactor. But again, most of it is still uranium-238. Nuclear weapons have to be enriched completely. So whether it's the uranium-235 bomb or a plutonium-239 bomb, you have to have it almost all of the fissionable nuclei. So that you have to enrich that like crazy. Now, if you're a bomb, okay, I'm sorry. So the reason this works is that a neutron comes in, splits 235 nucleus into two unequal pieces called fission products, and 3 neutrons come out with a little bit of energy. Now, so there's 3 for 1. 1 neutron in, 3 neutrons out. That's why this works, okay? Now, it's these pieces that are the really hot ones, although many of them are not hot at all. But when we think of hot nuclear fuel, we're thinking of strontium-90 and cesium-137. Everything else is not very hot. Now, if you're a bomb, you're all 235. So those 3 neutrons see another 235. There's almost no 238 there. So they split, and now you're at 9, 2781, boom. In a microsecond, you have 10 to the 20 neutrons, 10 to the 20 splits, and that's your bomb. It all happens at once. Now, the energy of a bomb comes from the pieces flying apart. Okay, it doesn't come from radiation. The radiation is incidental to a nuclear bomb. It's a big bomb. So these 2 pieces, fly apart at near light speed. So if you have 10 to the 20 of these, you're going to have a lot of heat and a lot of pressure, and that's what a bomb is. It's the blast. So if you look at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, they killed about 250,000 people. 98% of those died from the blast, not radiation. There was a little pulse at the edge of the blast zone of high energy neutrons and gamma rays, and those killed a few thousand. That's horrible, but not the 250,000 died from the blast. So again, a bomb is a blast. Now, if you're fuel, you're almost all 238. So when that neutron hits a 235, it splits, gives off 3 neutrons. Those neutrons generally don't see another uranium-235. They see a 238, which doesn't split. It captures that neutron and double beta decays and forms plutonium-239. You're breeding plutonium from uranium-238. Okay, so you're breeding plutonium. Now, in a nuclear reactor for power, that's fine because the plutonium burns even better than uranium-235. So after a couple of years, you're actually producing more power from the bred plutonium than you are from the original 238. Now, after 5 years or so, the fission products build up to the point where they start scarfing up all the neutrons and the thing fizzles out. There's just too much junk in it. It's not spent, although we call it spent nuclear fuel. It's just, has too much junk in it. You can recycle it, make new fuel, or not, but uranium is so cheap and plentiful that it's not really worth to do that. Now, if you want to make a bomb, okay, a bomb is completely different. You have a reactor. It's not a reactor to produce power. Okay, it was a reactor to produce plutonium for weapons. And the reason you want to do that is that if you want to put a nuclear weapon on a missile, it needs to be plutonium because uranium is too heavy. So uranium-235 bomb we dropped from an airplane. You don't put those on missiles. If you're on a missile, you need plutonium. So we were breeding plutonium in the weapons reactors, not producing electricity, breeding plutonium in a weapons reactor in order to separate the plutonium and make bombs. That's what we did at Hanford. Now, in a weapons reactor, you can't run the fuel for more than 6 months. After that, you start breeding in what's called nuclear poison, neutron poisons, and that means your bomb won't work. So a weapons reactor is not to produce power, it's to produce plutonium. And then you take the fuel out after only 6 months. You can't leave it in there more than 6 months. And then you have to dissolve it up and produce plutonium from it. So what you have here are two different types of waste. Okay, you have the fission products, like the pieces of the split atom. Those are hot, short-lived, generally short-lived. Then you have these bred-in actinides, and neptunium, plutonium, americium, a bunch of other actinides, the last bottom row of the periodic table. Those are not very hot at all. You can hold plutonium in your hand. It won't hurt you. You have to eat it or breathe it in order for it to hurt you. So it's not very hot, but it's long-lived. Okay, so you have short-lived hot nuclides like strontium and cesium, and you have long, not very hot nuclides like neptunium and americium and plutonium. Now, at Hanford, when we were making bombs, we would run these weapons reactors for 6 months, take out the fuel, dissolve it up in acid, and put it through a series of separations. So the first 2 separations are to get rid of most of the other junk, all the fission products, all the hot, short-lived stuff, because we want just plutonium-239 or uranium-235. So we would remove all that stuff, and those first 2 steps, it gets rid of most of the other junk, goes into the high-level waste tanks. Okay, so only that goes into the high-level waste. The rest of the steps are to polish the plutonium for use, make pits out of them, and the waste from that goes into the true tanks, transuranic waste, that third category of nuclear waste I showed. So you have 2 different tanks at Hanford. You have the high-level waste, and you have the transuranic tanks. Now, the bizarre thing is the leakers, we talk about the leakers are almost all the true tanks. They're the old true tanks that are leaking. High-level waste tanks are not generally leaking. Now, something happened since the 70s. First, we removed most of the cesium and strontium, and we put them in little capsules. And the others have been through a couple of decay lives. So now all these high-level waste tanks don't have high-level waste in them. There's no high-level waste in any high-level waste tank at Hanford, which is kind of bizarre. It's all transuranic or even low-level. So again, when we were doing this in the 40s and 50s and 60s, we weren't really paying attention to the environmental issues, and we weren't really paying attention to what was going in the tanks. So we would fill up a tank and let it spill over into the next tank, and then fill it up and spill over into the next tank. So we don't even know what's exactly in any one tank. Okay, but all of them now are transuranic or low level because we took out the hot stuff, and the other bunch of hot stuff is decayed away 1 or 2 half-lives. So it's kind of bizarre when people talk about high-level waste at Hanford, there isn't any left. So keep that in mind. So there's 3 ways science enters the decision-making process. 1, it's ignored. Okay, I don't feel bad anymore. I'm used to it. We're all used to it. That's fine. And I should say that's okay, because most decisions actually don't have to be made on the basis of science. I mean, we know scientifically that the more elementary schools you have in an area, the better the GDP of that area is in the long run. That's science. But we don't use science to decide where to build a school. That's a political decision, an economic decision. So again, it's okay. Most of it's ignored. The other way science enters the decision-making process is it enters before the decision is made. I mean, the decision makers will approach scientists, it's happened to me a lot, and say, okay, what's the best answer here? What should we do? And we go through a bunch of testing. Maybe sometimes it takes years, come back with an answer. This is what you should do. And very infrequently, but sometimes they say, okay, good, we'll do it. And that's great. That's how it should enter. If it's a science-based issue, especially like nuclear waste, if it's, and like the pandemic, like coronavirus, you need to make decisions based on science, okay? And that's great. You need to make those decisions. When you don't, bad things happen. Now, the third way is that it enters after the decision is made, and that sounds weird. It means someone's politically, historically, geographically, monetarily, whatever, they've made a decision, and then they bring the scientists and say, make this work. Now, that sounds worse than it kind of is, though sometimes it's pretty bad. But that's okay. Again, someone has made a decision, and you want to know the best way to carry out that decision. Okay, that's fine. Now, our nuclear waste program started out as 2. It was a very good program based totally on science. And then it became 3 in the 1970s as a result of politics. And that's when things took a bad turn. So going back to 1957, the National Academy of Sciences put out a very nice study. They were asked by, at that time, the Atomic Energy Commission that later split and became DOE and NRC. So the AEC approached the National Academy of Sciences and says, where should we put this stuff? I mean, you know, we're going to start making this. We've made a bunch of bombs. We just fired up the first commercial, reactor, power reactor. We're going to start making this waste. Where should we put it? And the answer was actually quite simple and easy. It probably took 10 people like me around the lunch table and said, there's no question, put it in salt, massive salt, not thin bedded salts, massive salt. And we have a lot of that in this country, but particularly the Permian Salt Basin, and particularly the Delaware subbasin near Carlsbad in southeast New Mexico and West Texas. And so that, and the nice thing about salt, the reason you choose that, is that it is molecularly tight. It cannot sustain an opening, a fracture, or anything. It self-seals. It's plastic. Although it's massive, it's plastic. And so this is wonderful. You drill your waste rooms, you put waste in there, and the walls, floor, ceiling start creeping in, and it's encapsulated in about 10 years. It's quite amazing. And we've been doing this. Again, I mentioned we have a deep geologic nuclear reactor repository no one knows about. It's near Carlsbad in this salt. And it was decided at this time or shortly afterwards that was where it was going to go, and that all nuclear waste of any type from any source should go there because it was designed and built for all nuclear waste. So to give you an idea of how tight it is, it takes 1 billion years for water to move an inch, which is pretty good. Now, unfortunately, things kind of got weird in the 1970s. So AEC established new categories, these 4 categories of nuclear waste, and they said, well, we're going to split them up, which is kind of dumb. So we're going to do different things. Now, 1976, we decided not to reprocess commercial spent fuel, not to recycle it, okay? Because you could, although not really, possibly make a bomb out of it. Now, I mentioned before that if you keep nuclear fuel in a reactor more than 6 months, it's no good to make bombs. And so all reactor fuel, it stays in there about 6 years. So there's no way you can make a bomb from spent nuclear fuel that's been in a reactor more than 6 months. However, the people making this decision didn't really understand that. So they said, okay, we're not going to recycle, we're not going to reprocess spent fuel, and we might change our minds, which is also very weird. So we might change our minds. So we want it to be retrievable. We want to build, $1 billion underground nuclear repository to put nuclear waste in, and we might change our minds in 50 years, so we want to pull it back out. That's dumb. I mean, that's a screen door in a submarine. So that is just absolutely the ridiculous thing to do with nuclear waste. If you don't want to throw it out, don't throw it out. Okay, so, but most of the nuclear waste we have, the high-level waste, the transuranic waste, that actually is waste. It's of no use at all. It is the waste from reprocessing. And so that, goes away forever and ever. So then the idea that you're going to retrieve or possibly retrieve spent nuclear fuel and high-level waste means the salt is out because the salt collapses and encapsulates, and you can't get it back out easily, which is, of course, a good thing if you want to put it away forever and ever. But they said, okay, well, the salt's out, which is dumb because it's the best rock you could possibly have for this. And then but we're going to look for a separate site that is retrievable. However, the transuranic waste was still going to go into the salt. So that continued on, and we have a nuclear repository for transuranic waste, bomb waste, in that salt deposit near Carlsbad, New Mexico. Then 1982 comes around, and we do the Nuclear Waste Policy Act. Now, at the same time, I mentioned a lot has happened to this waste, especially in the tanks at Hanford, and there's no high-level waste anymore, or very little of it. Most of it is at Savannah River. In fact, none of it's at Hanford. So we've gotten rid of most high-level waste that was going to go into this repository, which is also weird. Now, after 1982, after the Nuclear Waste Policy Act was enacted, we had 17 candidate sites for 2 high-level waste repositories, which people don't remember. There's supposed to be 2. If everyone only remembers Yucca Mountain, because that was decided in 1987. So the sites considered for the first repository were these. So they're the west and south. And the sites considered for the second repository is north and east. Now, powerful Eastern politicians at that time, they were much more powerful than the West, removed all the Eastern sites, of course. Why not? They removed the second site completely. They said, you're just going to build one first, and when that's full, you're going to build the other one. Well, of course, there's not enough waste to justify 2 sites anyway. All of it could fit in one site easily. There's just volumetrically not much waste. So by 1987, the remaining Western sites were narrowed to 3. Yucca Mountain, Nevada, that everyone's heard of, Hanford, Washington, everyone's also heard of that, and Deaf Smith County, Texas, which no one's ever heard of. Now, at the time, the Speaker of the House was Jim Wright from Texas, so that was out. House Majority Leader was Tom Foley from Washington State. Here, I remember him well. So Washington's out. There was this new junior named Harry Reid from Nevada, so Nevada was chosen. It's it. They just said, Harry, it's yours. Now, of course, that didn't go over very well. So eventually, Harry Reid became Senate Majority Leader and led the effort to shut down Yucca Mountain. Now, when President Obama was elected in 2008, Reid said, listen, you're going to kill Yucca Mountain if you want my help in the Senate, which is fine because Yucca Mountain is a terrible place to put anything. So we halted it in 2009, and we put together a Blue Ribbon Commission to develop a new strategy. You might have heard about the Blue Ribbon Commission. It was a very good commission, actually. Now, let me move this off to the side here. What makes a good deep geologic nuclear waste repository? There are 7 criteria we've always used to evaluate the suitability of a site for a deep geologic repository. Everyone in the world does this. So first, a simple hydrogeology, right? I mean, you don't want this complicated mess that you have no idea what's going on underground and water's going everywhere. So you want a simple hydrogeology, a simple geologic history. I mean, you want to know what's happened in the last billion years, and you want it to be simple. You don't want it to be complicated. A tectonically interpretable area. That's interesting because you want to know where the faults are. You want to know where the faults and the folds and the activity is because the crust is tectonically active in some areas. You want the isolation. You want to be isolating this waste forever and ever. So you want it to be robustly assured for all waste types. You don't need to make a special waste type like vitrifying the waste out here. You shouldn't need to do that because that's an extra step you don't need if you put it in the right rock. You do not want to rely on engineered barriers. Now, I love the pyramids, love them, they're great, but we don't build things that last a million years, okay? And, you know, if you're going to depend on a bunch of engineered barriers designed and built by humans to last a million years, you are going up the wrong tree. The next one is performance that's independent of the canister, meaning the canister is only for transportation. You just have to get the waste to the site. And then once it's in the site, who cares what happens to the canister, okay? You don't want to have to design a million-year canister because things don't last a million years, in the subsurface especially. And then the last one's kind of weird. A geographic region that has an existing and sufficient socio-political and economic infrastructure to carry out the operations without proximity to a rapidly growing metropolis. Meaning you want it in the middle of nowhere, but there has to be a Walmart within an hour's drive. I'm not kidding, it's kind of funny. Because no one will live there and work there if they don't have an actual place where their family can grow up and they can go to the store and all this kind of stuff. But you don't want it a huge, you know, metropolis that has millions of people. You want it to be a little town that's nice to live in. That's fine. And I've lived in those. In fact, that's how Hanford got started. That's how Richland got started. Okay, what's going on here? It won't go forward. Okay, I am going to up. Let's see. I don't want to pause share. I apologize. I'm going to stop my sharing and I'm going to reshare. Okay. It just wouldn't go forward, so I'm not sure why that is. Okay, let's move on. Okay, good. All right, so we come to Yucca Mountain. So Yucca Mountain was chosen in 1987 for political reasons, just because Jim Wright was Speaker of the House from Texas. So let's go through this list. Okay, Yucca Mountain, a simple hydro. Okay, first of all, Yucca Mountain is a highly fractured, oxidizing, variably saturated, dual porosity hydrologic system that sits on the edge of the Las Vegas shear zone. Now, none of those words convey any feeling of security, if you know what any of them mean. So let's go through this list. So a simple hydrogeology. Nope, it's not simple at all at Yucca Mountain. A simple geologic history. Nope, not that either. A tectonically interpretable area. Yes, we know what's going on. There's lots of folds and faults because it sits on the edge of the Las Vegas shear zone, in which the Mojave Block is being rotated on one side by the San Andreas Fault and on the north side by the Garlock Fault. These two huge faults that are rotating the Mojave Block part of the crust, and that goes right through Yucca Mountain. We know that. It's not very nice, but we know that. No, it's not. Yucca Mountain is not assured isolation. It's not assured for all types of waste. That's why we're vitrifying this waste out here, okay? Because it's not good enough to take it in its original form. Minimal reliance. No, we actually have 7 engineered barriers to make this place work for the models, and that's kind of dumb. No, it actually depends on the canister, so that's why we have to make super copper canisters for this waste in order to make Yucca Mountain work. Now, the last one is correct. It's in the middle of nowhere, but Pahrump is only about an hour drive, so that's a nice little town. So, okay, so 2 out of 7. Not all that great. As a result of this, to fully implement Yucca Mountain will cost well over $300 billion, and that number has now gone up to $600 billion. The Government Accounting Office just said, because costs keep going up. This was decided in 1987, but things have gone up. In fact, these engineered barriers alone take $20 billion of titanium. Now, if you put it in the correct rock, it would only cost about $30 billion. So here's Yucca Mountain plan. Here are the 7 engineered barriers needed to make it pass the modeling. And again, this re-engineering is to counteract the fact that you picked the wrong rock. Now, there's already a site that meets this. I mentioned it, the salt, and we already have a nuclear waste repository there. And it was designed and built for everything. And it is called WIP, the Waste Isolation Pilot Plant or Pilot Project. And it's only for bomb waste. It was built to do everything, designed and built to hold everything, but it was only permitted and licensed for this defense-generated bomb waste, transuranic waste. And those are the dose limits that can go in there. So 100 nanocurie per gram up to 23 curie per liter. 23 curie per liter is 10 times hotter than anything at Hanford. So this can take everything. Now WIP is, shown that it's cost effective and it's safe. No one's ever been killed at WIP. No one's ever been hurt at WIP, except by running off the road in their truck or being, hit by a car or something like that. But the waste has never hurt anyone at WIP, and it's been operating since 1999. Now, in the 1992 Land Withdrawal Act that set up WIP, 16 square miles was set aside. 16 square miles was set aside by law for nuclear waste disposal. Out of 10,000 square miles of this ideal formation. So there's plenty of room. And when WIP is full, when it's got all the transuranic waste it was going to hold, it'd only be a half a square mile has been used out of 16. So if you want to expand this back to what it was originally supposed to do and handle all nuclear waste, that would be very easy. Well, I'm getting a little annoyed with this not being able to go forward. Let's see. Let's share the screen again. I apologize, folks. Um, okay, let's see if it goes. Yes, there it is. So even the hot stuff. Here's the dumbbell shaped 72B casts that hold the really hot stuff, and we've been disposing of that at WIP since 2007. Now here is an outline of the plan. A picture of the surface facilities are up here. So it's a half a mile below the earth in the middle of this unique and very thick and very widespread Salado salt formation. Okay, there are shafts. There's 4 shafts into the underground: air entry shaft, air exhaust shaft, a waste handling shaft, and salt handling shaft. So they go down to these drifts, which are just horizontal tunnels, and then you have these panels, where the waste rooms are in. This is all mining terminology, a panel and a drift and all that kind of thing. But each of these rooms, see, the panel 1 has 7 rooms in it, and each room holds, well, it's 300 feet long and 30 feet wide, 13 feet high. It holds about a football field worth of waste. So it's actually quite large. And we can expand this. In fact, we're building 2 more panels out here, 9 and 10. 7 is almost full, if not full, and panel 8 is being dug out. So this has been very, very good. Now, the reason this salt is here is that about 270 million years ago during the Permian, the edge of the Proto-Pacific Ocean was off the coast of Utah and Arizona. There was a little arm of this sea that came into West Texas and southeast New Mexico, and it was repeatedly separated from the ocean and evaporated. So it was flooded, evaporated, flooded, evaporated, flooded, evaporated for about 60 million years, and it precipitated 6,000 feet of salt. And this is sodium chloride salt. The top 2,000 feet are particularly pure. I actually make margarita salt out of it whenever I go down there. It's kind of funny. But again, you have 6,000 feet of salt. Now, the funny thing about that is if you look at the salt, if we were in person, I apologize, I would have had a huge salt piece that everyone could look at. If you look closely, there are square bubbles, crystallographically trapped 270 million year old seawater. And in that seawater, we have isolated 270 million year old DNA and crenulated bacterial husks and cellulosics from cell walls. So this is old stuff. It's the oldest DNA we've ever found. And that's because the salt is a perfect preservative, and it's just pure salt. It's pure sodium chloride. So the deposits occurred fast enough that it was buried, so cosmic rays were shut off pretty quickly, which degrades DNA and biomolecules. It's pure salt, so there's no naturally occurring radioactive materials. It's everywhere. If you just look to your left and you see a wall that has uranium in it, no question, thorium in it. We building materials, natural materials, but this is pure salt. There's no naturally occurring radioactive material. It was also never buried deep enough that the temperature rose above 190 degrees or 41 degrees Celsius, which is the temperature that DNA and proteins unwind. That's why we're very upset if you get a fever over 104, because you're at risk of your DNA unwinding, which would be very bad. So anyway, so that's why it's there. It's just it's nature's trash compactor. Couldn't design a rock this good if we tried. Now, because it's salt, I mean, it's hard salt. I mean, if I threw a piece at your head, it would hurt. But geologically, it's a soft rock. So you don't have to use dynamite to mine it. You just use these big, what's called continuous Marriott miners that have these tungstide carbon bits that just dig this out. It's very easy. So it ends up looking like this. So this is all salt. It's all pure salt. And again, we've been shipping even the hot stuff here, which is up to 23 curies per liter, to this place, along with the not so hot stuff, since 1999. So here's what a waste room looks like. So the hot stuff is in the wall here, behind this guy. robotically drilled out 14-foot borehole, robotically emplaced waste, the hot stuff, and plugged with a 4-foot metal wrap cement plug. And then the other stuff that isn't very hot, that's mainly plutonium, americium, stuff like that, that you only need a 1/4 inch of mild steel to shield against, are in these waste containers. Now, this person here, this RadTech, he's getting 1/10 of the dose, radiation dose that you and I are getting right now at the surface, because he's a half-mile below the Earth, so there's not much cosmic rays get down there. This is all salt, so there's no uranium, thorium, or naturally occurring radioactive material that makes most of our dose on Earth. In fact, the biggest dose he's getting is from the potato chips he ate for lunch, since potassium-40 potato chips make potato chips the hottest, most radioactive food there is. It's no big deal, but it's kind of funny. So 20 years of operation, we've emplaced over 120,000 cubic meters of bomb waste. That's equivalent to about 600,000 55-gallon drums. We've cleaned up 21 storage sites. The reason Rocky Flats is a green field now is because of WIP. We had one minor release on Valentine's Day 2014. It's no big deal, although we're going to all excited about it, but it was no big deal. 0 deaths, 0 people contaminated. That release did not contaminate humans, contrary to what some of you might have heard. It was actually my monitoring laboratory that was in charge of that. So even with that, WIP is 10 years ahead of schedule and is under budget. Now, the bizarre thing, I don't know of any federal program that is ahead of schedule and under budget, but WIP is. So when you seal this off, when you put the waste in there and you close the room, over time, very quickly, the wall, floor, ceilings come up and encapsulate this and crush it down, and then eventually it's back to where it was around this waste. So again, if you know anything about hydraulic conductivity or permeability or diffusion coefficients, these are very low numbers. So water contaminants move less than an inch in 1 billion years in this rock. That's why it's a good rock. And not to get too weird about it, but it's because of the properties of the rock. I mean, it's very low porosity, except for those little molecularly tight fluid inclusions. The pH is perfect for this. It's the lowest solubility for plutonium. The EH or the redox potential is really low. So even if something might happen, plutonium doesn't move at these EH conditions, as does technetium and most other things. The thermal capacity of the salt, the thermal conductivity of the salt, is 5 times that of Yucca Mountain. So you can put really hot stuff in this, even more than you can in any other rock. And again, the annealing of this creep closure that crushes this and isolates it actually goes very quickly, and it goes as the 6th power of the temperature. So the hotter the waste, the better this system works. And the performance period you're granted by this rock is 200 million years, not 10,000 or 100,000 years like we struggle for at most other sites. So you don't have to have any engineered barriers. You just have to get the waste there. The waste form is irrelevant. You don't have to vitrify. Doesn't matter what the form of the waste is, as long as you can get it on the road, as long as you meet Department of Transportation requirements, which is all you need to meet. You don't need a great canister. There's no adverse temperature effects. Fluid inclusion migration is irrelevant. I mean, again, we could not pick a better rock. We couldn't create or synthesize a better rock than this. Now here is the 16 square miles. This is an aerial view, 16 square miles set aside by the 1992 Land Withdrawal Act that set up WIP. And this is the existing coverage underground of the WIP rooms. So it's a very small amount of this 16 square miles. If you want to beef it up and put what was supposed to go into Yucca Mountain into this, you'd, be up to maybe 2 square miles or 3 out of 16. So again, this is easily expandable to what it was originally designed for. So that's kind of important. So the time frame, the regulatory time frame that you have to meet for anything for the tanks out here, for nuclear waste disposal, for anything, when it comes to radioactivity, is you have to meet this 4 millirem per year whole body dose at the down gradient family farm well, or out in the Columbia River water. Okay, the water that leaves this site for at least 1,000 years has to be less than 4 millirem per year. And the 10,000 year requirement is it has to be 1 in 10, less than 1 in 10 chance of exceeding that 4 millirem a year. Now, what is 4 millirem a year? It's a unit of dose. Again, here we go. 4 millirem a year is about 1 round trip flight between Washington, D.C. and Seattle. Okay, so that'll give you 4 millirem. So that's kind of weird. That's pretty stringent. I mean, you know, the background radiation is over 300 millirem per year in Washington State. In fact, if you move from Seattle to Spokane, you would get 50 millirem a year extra. So we should certainly outlaw that. I hope they got a laugh. Okay, so what are the costs of over-regulating nuclear? And the reason I bring this up is that this, 4 millirem a year is an absurd limit to be able to meet, because background radiation and REM takes into account whether it's natural or unnatural, or whether it's plutonium or cesium or potassium-40 and potato chips. It doesn't matter. REM takes all the biological factors as well as the physical factors into account. So 4 millirem a year is 4 millirem a year, and 300 background is 300. So if you're going to build a nuclear repository to meet 4 millirem a year, but you're not going to outlaw moving to Spokane, what are the costs? A better question to ask is, how much do we consider the value of a human life to be? This is actually quite telling. So EPA considers the value of a human life to be $7 million. I don't know if anyone of you knew that, but it's kind of interesting. So if you have a toxic dump site near Seattle and people start dying, EPA considers that value of each of those people to be $7 million. Now, the average paid out in healthcare over a lifetime is about $316,000. So we basically keep people alive in the hospital and stuff, averaging about $316,000. Now, of course, if you're rich and famous, they'll spend more on you, of course. And if you're not, they'll spend less. So the average paid out in healthcare over life is $316,000. Now, lawyers probably understand this better than anyone else, but lawyers consider the value of a human life to be about $129,000. That's the average historic legal value of wrongful death suits. Now, again, if you're famous and rich, then you'll get more than that, but that's the average. Now, this is kind of disgusting. Death benefits to family of deceased soldiers is about $12,000. So that's what our government considers the value of a soldier's life. Now, that can be more depending on how the person died in combat, that kind of thing. But that's not much value. Now, the real value comes if you're a healthy, 28-year-old and you decide to get chopped up for body parts, you'll get about $45 million on the black market. But DOE is spending about $2.5 billion per theoretical human life saved in nuclear waste disposal, like the Hanford tanks. And that's what we're spending to save a single life in the year 4000 or something like that. $2.5 billion. That's what we're spending. Now, this is actually an ethical issue because $100 per human life saved, if you immunize the continent of Africa, for that $2.5 billion, you could immunize the continent of Africa against the 3 biggest scourges: measles, diphtheria, and pertussis. And that, that's very interesting. I don't want to devolve into an ethical discussion, although it's actually a good one to have. But is it worth it? Should we be spending $2.5 billion on a theoretical human life saved a few thousand years from now versus people that are dying in droves? I mean, that $2.5 billion would save 25 million people, the lives of 25 million people. versus saving one theoretical life in the distant future. So keep that in mind. Okay, so, oh dear, let me go. Okay, we can get back to that. So what's going to happen to our nuclear waste? I mean, if I had to predict, and I'm actually the one to do it, this is what will happen. We will have interim storage for commercial spent nuclear fuel, which is great. It's good for over 100 years. I'm not kidding. It's really a piece of cake. Either on site, where it is now, or at a centralized facility that New Mexico and Texas is trying to build. So either all the spent nuclear fuel, like out here at the Columbia Generating Station, our commercial nuclear reactor out here, either it sits on site or it moves to a centralized facility. I like a centralized facility because it's pretty much a cement pad, guards and fences. It's really easy and cheap to do. Now, the reason you want to hold on to it is because we will burn this in fast reactors toward the end of the century. Bill Gates is actually designing one right now. It's called TerraPower is his nuclear company. I'm not sure if any of you realize that Bill Gates has a nuclear company. He started up about 10 years ago. I go there a lot. It's in Bellevue, called TerraPower. And his traveling wave reactor will burn this fuel and turn it all into fission products, the short-lived stuff, the hot but short-lived stuff. And then that waste would then go to WIP. Or alternatively, I mean, we certainly will continue sending true to WIP, and transuranic waste is the biggest volume of nuclear waste we have outside of low-level waste. So continue true to WIP. High-level waste, or whatever it is now, if you reclassify it, should also go to WIP. Otherwise, everything stays right where it is. And I'm not kidding. There's no other alternative. People say we're going to find another state. It's like, no other state's going to take this. Look at what's happened in the last 30 years when we picked two states. We picked New Mexico and Nevada, and no other state is going to step up and say, "Oh yeah, we'll take it." No, you either make Yucca Mountain work and spend an absurd amount of money doing it, or you expand WIP. And of course, those are political decisions, and there'll be political fallout from it. But WIP is the right rock. And so if science has anything to say about this, and it might not, but if it has anything to say about this, everything should go to WIP. Or it's just going to stay where it is because no one's going to take it. Now, interim storage, I don't know if you've ever seen them. They're kind of neat. Yeah, they just sit there deep inside that huge cement metal container are a bundle of used fuel assemblies that are just sitting there. They cool off, after about 100 years. They're not very hot. After 200 years, they're not very hot at all, because the fission products, the hottest ones, cesium-137 and strontium-90, have 30-year half-lives. So the basic rule of thumb is 7 half-lives to background, so 30 years, 210 years. So you have to really worry about the fission products for about 210 years. Now, you've probably heard about deep borehole injection. That's come up recently. It's actually kind of a neat idea. It's technically difficult, but we're getting better at drilling. In fact, we're getting incredibly good at drilling, unfortunately, for hydrocarbons, but the technology is there. What this is you drill a deep borehole, like, a few miles into the earth. It's so deep that there is no geologic process that can get it up to the surface or anywhere near the surface in the next several million years. So that's why this works. It's just deep. And then, of course, you pack it with things, asphalt, compacted bentonite, whatever. But there, once that's in place, there's nothing you can do to get it out. Okay, it cannot come out. Now, there's a new company out of Berkeley called Deep Isolation, and what they've done is they go down deep, and then they kind of go sideways because, again, we've gotten very good at lateral drilling. And then they put a little plumber's trap in there so that not only can it come out, but it has to go down first and then come back up, which is even more highly unlikely. So that's kind of a neat thing. But the problem is you have to dig, boreholes that are, 3 feet wide, and we don't do that. we deal with boreholes that are 6 inches, 8 inches max to go very deep. But we can do that, and the cost is not as prohibitive as you might think. So here is the probable outcomes for the U.S. nuclear waste. And this was supported by the Obama's Blue Ribbon Commission on Nuclear Waste that he put in place in 2010. The defense waste, the transuranic and high-level waste, like the Hanford tanks, either it stays right where it is, and we can get into that because it's no longer high-level waste, or you redefine it and send it, because it's true and low level now. There's no high-level waste left. So you redefine it as true, as it should be, and you send it to WIPP. Or you say, well, okay, we're just going to do a second salt repository. We have lots and lots of salt. There's a little map here. Here's the best. The best stuff is in yellow. That's that Delaware subbasement of the Permian Formation. But we have lots and lots of salt. And if you want to put it someplace else, we can put it someplace else. Again, salt is cheap because it doesn't require any engineered barriers, and it's easy to mine. Commercial nuclear fuel, so that's for defense waste. For commercial fuel, you either do interim storage, then you burn it in Bill Gates' fast reactor, or what other there's several people working on fast reactors. We actually built a fast reactor right here at Hanford, and it worked great. It was called FFTF, and we shut it down, unfortunately, 20 years ago. But it worked great. We know how to do this. We can do it. Then you burn that, you get 10 times the amount of power out of the same waste, and then that waste is all short-lived fission products, and then you put that into WIPP or salt or whatever. Or you can put it down into boreholes, because that waste can be put into thin containers. See, the high-level waste, transuranic, the burnt fast reactor waste, those can all be put into smaller containers that are easier to dispose of in deep boreholes. So this is it. There's no other alternative. Nebraska isn't going to come up and say, yeah, we'll take it. Then this is it. Either New Mexico says, okay, we already have a nuclear waste here. No one's been hurt. It's been wonderful, great. The local people love it. Great jobs, safest jobs there are. And we'll expand it to take all nuclear waste. Either that happens, or Texas goes, no, we'll do it. They want to put their site right about here. And again, if it's in the same formation, like I mentioned, this formation goes 10,000 square miles. So Texas can put it in the same formation, just use the WIPP techniques and the experience we have at WIPP and put one there. That's fine too. And that's it. Or we do some deep borehole stuff. So there isn't a lot of choice. I don't have Yucca Mountain as a choice because we will never be able to afford $600 extra billion for something that should only cost 30. And that's the real problem here. We're broke. I mean, we were not broke when this was decided. Again, we thought we were rich and could do anything we wanted. But we will never have that much money to deal with a small amount of waste. All nuclear waste in the world would fit into one soccer field, which is, that's not much waste. The coal industry produces that much toxic waste every 30 minutes. So 60 years of nuclear waste takes up the same volume as 30 minutes of coal toxic waste. So again, the volumes are so low, it's hard to think about it. Now, everyone talks about 70,000 tons of waste, and that sounds like a lot, but 70,000 tons of uranium, that's heavy. That's just, it would, it just would fit in one soccer field. So there's no reason to have two repositories. That's absurd. You just double the risk and double the cost. So you need one repository. You need to put it in the right place, salt, and pretty much that's it. Thank you. Let me get out of this here. Was that a good intro? You can unmute. That's good.
Yes. Yes.
So that's kind of where we are. That's what's happened to our nuclear waste program over the last 30 years. Now, what's going to happen going forward? Again, that's it. We only have a few choices. DOE is frantically trying to reclassify the Hanford tank waste so it's not high level, because it's not high level. I mean, it's so bizarre. People are against that. I mean, because they don't understand waste. Who understands waste? I mean, this is not your average high school subject. But people say, "Oh, we don't want to reclassify the waste to what it is." And it's like, why? What do you mean? If it's not high-level waste, why would you treat it like high-level waste? It's not high-level waste. So if you do that, you're just going to waste a lot of time and money, and it's scientifically stupid. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense unless you're just afraid. You're afraid of all nuclear waste. So it doesn't matter what you call it or what you think it is. You're just afraid you don't want to do anything. So I mean, I understand that.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
I'm sure there's a good answer to this, and I have a very simple one. I just don't know what it is. What about earthquakes? Would that not put a fissure in a salt formation that would allow leakage?
If you're anywhere near a fault. So that's why you pick the Salado salt. It is the tectonically quietest area in North America. It hasn't had a fault in 200 million years and isn't going to have a fault for another 200 million years. It's so quiet that these formations that were laid down, in the ocean as it was evaporating, right? They're perfectly horizontal. Before lasers, we used to use the bedding plane because it was so flat. It hadn't tipped even a fraction of a degree in 200 million years. And that is odd. There are no formations other than this that I know of that are not tilted a little bit. So this isn't tilted at all. So nothing has happened. No volcanism, no folding, no faulting. Nothing has happened in 200 million years, and nothing's going to happen for 200 million more. That's why, as a geologist, that's easy, but who would know that but a geologist? So that's why you ask geologists, where do you want to put this? And they'll tell you the best rock, and then you can ignore them. That's fine. We always get ignored. But if you want to know, the best place to put it, this is the best place to put it. Yes, Catherine.
Thank you.
Oh, hi. I was just wondering why they wanted to retrieve this waste in the first place. What could they possibly use it for?
Yes, absolutely. Why would you possibly retrieve this waste? It is stupid. Well, again, let me back up a little bit. In the 70s, we had no clue how much uranium there was on Earth, right? We hadn't mapped everywhere. We pretty much mapped. We know all the deposits. There's more uranium than you can shake a stick at. I mean, there's no reason to recycle it unless you were afraid that you were going to run out of uranium. So you say, okay, well, we want to retrieve it in 50 years, but we don't need to because there's so much uranium. Now, what's even better is that we have now perfected a way to extract uranium, just uranium, from seawater. So we don't have to mine anymore, which is great because mining is the only bad thing about nuclear, is mining uranium. And so we can extract it from seawater, and then it pretty much becomes completely renewable because there's 5 billion years worth of uranium in seawater, and there's no way you're going to run out of uranium. And the nice thing about that is you simply extract just the uranium, nothing else. So that's pretty cool. Now it's going to take, it's still about twice as expensive as mining for uranium. So again, like any good free market economy, you have to get the cheapest, right? Someone's going to make a buck, and it's going to make a lot of bucks. This is America, but the cost of fuel, the cost of uranium and nuclear fuel is such a small part of the cost of nuclear power that you could increase the cost of uranium 10 times and you wouldn't even see it in the cost of nuclear power. See, unlike coal, the cost of coal is the entire cost of coal power. I mean, there's nothing else almost. I mean, maintenance a little bit, building the coal plants, no big deal. It's the cost of coal. You have to for a 1,000 megawatt coal plant, you have to run 100 ton coal cars every day into that plant. 100 ton coal cars. That's 10,000 tons of coal a day. Okay, so you use a couple of tons of uranium every 5 years. So again, the volume is so different that it's kind of hard to get your head around it.
Hey, Jim.
And that's why there's hardly any waste because the volume is so small. Sorry, that was a lengthy answer.
We have a question from Facebook. Ben Lilly asks, thanks so much. Very informative. As a college student considering career paths, what would you recommend? Science communication, policy, or nuclear engineering?
Well, that's funny. I've done all three. Nuclear engineering will be the most lucrative and the longest lasting. Okay. One of the problems is that people don't go into nuclear. So they're in huge demand. Okay, so you will never have to worry about a job if you go into nuclear engineering. Nuclear communication, I mean, that's kind of what I'm doing now, writing for Forbes. It's kind of funny. It's kind of fun, but, communications, it's not as, what's the word I want? It's not as secure. Okay, although it's great. If you understand nuclear, again, not many people do, so you may be in demand to be able to explain it well. A lot of people don't explain it well. So I would certainly go into that.
What are the politics in New Mexico?
Yeah, the farther away from WIP, the worse you like it. This is always the case. It's so funny. I mean, just think of Seattle. So here's Hanford, that is the safest jobs in the state. I mean, a Hanford worker has the safest job. Contrary to what you think or might have heard, no one at Hanford has gotten cancer from radiation. They've gotten cancer from beryllium or from asbestos, never from radiation. Now you might say, well, why do we pay out nuclear workers, because they get cancer? It's like, well, because DOE didn't want to fight that. So they just, anyone that gets cancer who's worked at the site, you just get $150,000. I like that. I like giving sick people money. I don't mind that at all. But it's not because of radiation. In fact, the cancer rates of Hanford workers is less than the general population. That is absolutely impossible if radiation is causing cancer, okay? The rates would be somewhat higher. These are epidemiological studies. We've done them for 70 years. And in fact, in the 90s, when we first found that so many Hanford workers did not get cancer compared to the general population, we had to come up with an excuse, a reason why Hanford workers were not getting cancer enough. All right. And this is just hilarious. This is talking about politics. We came up with it's total bullshit. Oh, I'm sorry. Totally stupid. But we came up with the DOE healthy worker syndrome, meaning DOE only hires healthy people that don't get cancer. Now that's hilarious because if you knew any of the old Hanford workers, they smoked like chimneys and they drank like fish. I mean, it was hilarious. These guys were not healthy, okay, but they did not get cancer from radiation because the levels were so low. There actually is a level above which you have to get radiation in order to get any possible risk of cancer, and that's about 20 rem. And these guys never got more than a few rem. In fact, the payouts for cancer, they just ignore the dose records of the people. Now, come on. I mean, ignore the dose records. Why? If you're paying out because someone got cancer from radiation and you have the dose records of what that worker received over their lifetime, you wouldn't use that? You wouldn't look at that? No, they don't, because it has nothing to do with radiation. So it's that's politics, huge politics. But it's funny, actually. I find that pretty hilarious. Mike Lawrence was the head of DOE when we were doing that. You should talk to him sometime. It's just very funny that we had to come up with an excuse for why Hanford workers were not getting cancer.
Well, do you have information as to what the politics are in New Mexico? For example,
I'm sorry. Yes, very well.
For example, if the governor of New Mexico were named the Democratic vice presidential nominee, would she feel obliged to shut down WHIP?
No, she wouldn't shut it down.
In order to make people in New Mexico happy.
No, she wouldn't shut it down, okay, because it's too lucrative and it's too safe, okay? I mean, it really is the best. In fact, the funny thing, Carlsbad was settled by German miners in 1880, okay? It's, Karlsbaden, I mean, it's a German word that means salt, salt water, hot water. So Carlsbad was settled by miners because of the salt. Okay, now mainly it was the potassium chloride that sits on top of the sodium chloride, but it doesn't matter. It's mining job, and it's dangerous. Mining is dangerous work, right? Dangerous work. So here comes DOE in the late 70s, and in fact the mayor of Carlsbad, I knew him well. Oh God, what's his name? Damn it, Bob Forrest. He kind of like Teddy Roosevelt. Was funny guy. And so he invited DOE and said, we want this waste. And DOE was like dumbfounded because they'd been run out of town for every other place they tried. And he said, no, we want this. We got mining. We know how to do salt. It's a piece of cake. And DOE said, well, there's a 1 in 10,000 chance that something bad will happen in 10,000 years. And they laughed because mining is dangerous. You die tomorrow. Okay, so here's risk. I mean, miners know risk, and there's no risk to this waste. So in fact, the miners just fell over themselves trying to get these jobs, because a mining job is dangerous because the mining company is making money. So they don't put extra air underground. They don't put safety. That costs money. And here's DOE that will not spend anything on safety, right? And so here these miners are like, my God, I'm getting paid twice as much as I did. And the ceilings underground are 13 feet high, not 6. Because when you go into a normal mine, you have to kind of ride like this with your head back so you don't hit the ceiling. Okay. And here's DOE with backs that are 13 feet high. And it's like, in all the air you want, 425,000 cubic feet per minute airflow. That's outrageous for a mine. So it's so safe. No one ever dies, at WIP. It's just amazing. And it's, because it's all about safety. Okay. Oh, I didn't answer your question. I'm sorry. So again, the local towns around WIP, they love it. They have been wanting this because it's great jobs, safe jobs. It's wonderful. The farther away you get back up to Albuquerque and up to Santa Fe, the more you hate it because you hate nuclear and anything nuclear. But you can't shut down WIP because it is actually embedded in contracts and law, so you can't shut it down. You may not want to expand it because of the hoopla, but you wouldn't shut it down. Now, this idea that, I'm an old, Roosevelt Democrat. I'm more left wing than probably anyone on this call, and I'm not kidding. Okay, I'm not kidding. And I'm in nuclear, which is bizarre because the way Democrats have treated nuclear scientists has been so bad that they all became Republican, which is weird. They all used to be Democrats before 1970. All the nuclear workers were Democrats. Okay, now they're all Republican, just because they were forced to be. Now, everyone says Republicans like nuclear, Democrats hate nuclear. Well, they both hate nuclear. Okay, the Republicans have been in charge of all branches of government many years in the last 20 years, and they never did anything for nuclear. Even when they controlled all 3 branches, never had any positive thing to do about nuclear. So you can get rid of this idea that Republicans like nuclear. Now, Democrats do hate nuclear. I get that. Wrongfully, but that's because everyone's so afraid of radiation they think every photon is going to kill you, which it doesn't. So the politics are based on misinformation. We can see that a lot now. But misinformation drives bad decision making. And that's why we haven't done anything for so long. But New Mexico would love to, the southeastern New Mexico would love to have WIP expanded to take everything. They'd jump at it, absolutely. But unlikely to happen unless they actually understand, unless the people in charge understand this.
Hey, Jim.
I don't know if that's a good answer or not.
We have another question from Facebook. This time, our good friend Christopher C. Bergen asks, do we know who or how it was changed? The radiation regs were changed in the 1950s. Galen Windsor said that good workers disappeared if they ignored these new regulations back in the day.
Yeah, that's a whole nother political / scientific talk. Okay, you might have heard of linear no threshold dose hypotheses. That's what governs our regulatory environment, is literally the idea that every photon could kill you, which is wrong. It takes about 1 billion photons at once to do any damage, and that generally does not lead to cancer either. You need a huge dose. But we decided, based on very bad reporting of science in the 1940s by someone named Hermann Mueller, that we would just be safe and say all radiation is bad. And we adopted that. Now we knew a long time ago, for 30 years before 1959, when this was adopted, what the safe levels of radiation were. I mean, Hanford actually was pioneering in this. Parker, I'm part of the Herbert Parker Foundation. I'm a trustee. He set up all the regs and all the, not regs, the PPE, all of the procedures for handling nuclear that we use today. He set those up in 1943 for the Hanford project, for the Manhattan Project, and they worked great, okay, because it takes about 20 to 70 rem to have any effect on the human body. But we dropped that to 4 millirem. Okay, so 20 to 4 millirem. Okay, that's, that's 4 orders of magnitude. So we just did that arbitrarily, not based on science. And everyone said, well, it's safer to be sorry. It's safer than sorry, right? Wrong, because now that's so onerous. It's so difficult to keep the 4 millirem. That's absurd. I mean, if you ate a bag of potato chips every day, which I know people who do, you get more than 4 millirem a year. So what's the problem? I mean, why are you doing this? Why are you making it so difficult to meet regs that are arbitrary? And that's why the cost for nuclear has gone up so much. It shouldn't be this high. And certainly Hanford shouldn't be spending $2 billion. Oh, I shouldn't say that. Probably Hanford workers would lynch me. But you don't need to be spending $2 billion a year to clean up something that isn't even high-level waste anymore. So I don't know if that answers that question either. Any other questions? I could go all night.
I've got one.
Yes.
You mentioned that you had a fast breeder reactor going for a while at
Yes.
Hanford, I think. Could you tell us about that and tell us maybe, are there any fast breeder reactors operating anywhere at the moment?
No, they've all been, well, let me step back. Commercially, they've all been test reactors. So the fast flux test facility at Hanford was a full-scale fast reactor, but it was a test reactor. It wasn't making power or anything. It was simply to investigate how to do this. Now, the funny thing is that the Russians, their Wolf class nuclear subs were all fast reactors, all of them. That's why they were much better subs than ours, although they were a little noisy, but they were really fast. I mean, speed-wise as well. So because they use these fast reactors, so they have decades of knowledge of this. Now they discontinued that, but yeah, we know how to do fast reactors. It's not really that difficult. Now making them commercial, right? That's tricky, in this day and age. So that's what Bill Gates is doing. Is that he's designing what's called a traveling wave reactor at his TerraPower place. Just, Google TerraPower, and it comes up very nice. Great bunch of people. And so that, we can do this. Now, the big need for fast reactors is material science, because these are fast neutrons, okay? So you need things that don't get brittle over time in that kind of a neutron flux. So it's all about neutrons, right? Neutrons are what split this stuff. And so you need better materials that don't degrade. And that's probably the biggest issue. But that's just an engineering issue. We can deal with that.
The other one I've read about is the Thorcon reactor.
Yes, thorium. Now, I love it. We have twice as much thorium in the world as uranium. India was really big on this because they have monzonite sands. They have much more thorium than they have uranium deposits in India. But again, we've done test reactors. We built them. That's fine. But we've not commercialized them. Now, one of the issues with nuclear power is regulatory, right? NRC has to approve you. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission has to approve your reactor, right? And they don't know anything about thorium. Okay, they don't have experts. And so they would have to gear up, right? Hire people, get experience, and that's going to take years. We will eventually get there. But if you want to build nuclear fast, you got to stick with uranium because we know it. And NRC knows it. The technology is well known. So that's why we're kind of doing it. And the same thing with the fast reactors. It's going to take years to license them once they're actually demonstrated, but they will be.
I've got a couple more online questions. Let's start with Ben Lilly from Facebook, his second question. So, have you visited other countries' repositories? Is it plausible for a single country to champion nuclear waste and collect it for disposal from others?
Absolutely. Brilliant question. And yes, there's some group called the Urias group in England that has 14 different countries together saying we only need one repository. I mean, the United States needs one. We have more nuclear waste than anyone else. We have more nuclear power than anyone else. And then France, France has a lot too, so they can have their own repository. But a lot of the countries that have nuclear only have like a couple of reactors. So why would you build a multi-billion-dollar repository for a couple of reactors? I mean, that doesn't make any sense. But if you aggregate everyone's waste and pick one place, now that's the politics, right? Pick one place. I would take it. I'd take it in New Mexico. Then it's a lot easier and cheaper. Now, I actually championed turning WIP into an international repository, but that didn't go over very well in 2005. But it would be brilliant. It wouldn't increase the risk anymore. I mean, this is easy stuff. We know how to do it, right? The risk to workers wouldn't increase at WIP. We have tons of room, and we could charge through the nose for that, right? We could, we'll take your waste off your hands. This is one thing that Russia is doing. Okay, they don't have a repository, but they say, you buy our reactor, we will take your waste back. Now they'll just throw it in the ocean or something, but that's okay. I mean, I'm just kidding. But yeah, they have no repository, but they'll take the waste back because they know that is a real linchpin of nuclear power, what to do with the waste. So you buy our reactor, we'll build it for you, and after 6 years, when you're replacing waste, we'll take it off your hands. That's brilliant. Now, the United States should do that because I'd rather have our reactors out there, which are safer, and I'd rather have our influence around the world rather than Russia and China, who is now building more reactors than anyone else, or South Korea, which is building reactors elsewhere too. So again, we could do this if we cared about science. We can't do this if all we care about is politics.
So the second online question is from German Military Toys on Twitter, who asks, when will there be a homeowner-sized reactor to perhaps operate for a homestead?
Aha, good idea. Probably 20 years. I'm not kidding. So what we are designing for the Mars colony is pretty much that. It's basically a nuclear reactor for a little hotel, basically. So, and that's all you need. Now, they actually don't have much waste. They're very easy to deal with, but we're designing it. NASA's designing it in league with a few companies. So yeah, we will have that. There's no question we will have small reactors. Now, again, I like big reactors. Okay, they don't sound as good, but you have an economy of scale, and we have a grid that is set up for large centralized production of electricity, right? So the idea that you're now going to give everyone photocells and a nuclear reactor, that gets a little weird. I just think handling 1 million little reactors around the country is much more daunting than a few big ones. So I don't know how that sounds.
Are you done there, Carl?
Nothing more online.
Oh, okay, I had something that I'd like to hear Jim talk about. The new Michael Moore movie, Planet of the Humans, I think avoided the topic of nuclear power. And I was wondering if you'd care to discuss that a little bit, that movie.
Well, I apologize. I just heard about it a lot, but I have not seen it. But pretty much he was saying that, again, like we all talk about, policy should not be driven by politics. So just because you think renewables are the only savior we have for global warming, you shouldn't set policy by that, because it's not the only thing we have to save global warming. So you need all non-fossil fuel sources, period. There's no way we can do it. I mean, you talk till you're blue in the face to people who don't know how the grid works or how power works or anything else or how much steel we need, but you cannot provide 8 billion people or 10 billion people in 20 years with enough power through renewables. You just can't do it. There's just not enough power density out there. And there's not enough steel. There's not enough copper. There's not enough neodymium. I mean, there just isn't enough. And so it's easy to say, well, we can build this one megawatt turbine here. Well, why not just build a couple of million of them? Well, that's the trick. You just can't scale up from 1 to 1 million when these are huge. I mean, the thing about wind and solar is they take 10 times more steel per megawatt than nuclear. Okay, I mean, that's just incredible. I mean, gas takes the least amount of steel and the least amount of cement per megawatt of anything. I mean, it's trivial. That's why everyone loves gas. You can whip up a gas plant in a year. Okay, it just doesn't take anything. It's all the cost of a gas plant is in the gas, is in the natural gas itself, and in pipelines. The infrastructure to get it there. But if you're going to build that many wind turbines and solar cells, you're going to have a lot more steel than we have right now. In fact, you probably take about 20 million tons of steel, and the annual output of steel globally is 1 million tons. So you're going to take all the steel produced in the world just to make wind turbines? I don't think so. It's not going to happen.
Jim, I think that in the Michael Moore movie, they're pretty much in agreement with what you've been saying about renewables. But since they want to ignore nuclear, their suggestion is to cope with global warming by just decreasing the amount of power we use. Austerity.
That's cute. I mean, it's never happened, but okay. This switches over to the ethical issues. Okay, this is the basis of the geopolitics of energy that Judith and I do. It takes 3,000 kilowatts per person per year to lift someone up out of abject poverty. Period. 3,000 kilowatt hours per year. So if you want to eradicate global poverty and its evil stepchildren, war and terrorism, you're going to have to provide about 40 trillion kilowatt hours a year. We do 24 now. So the idea that we're going to decrease that through some magical, economic whatever, or some, we're going to change physics or something so that we don't need that. That's it. You need that much energy, and we've been growing steadily. Now, the Great Recession and now the pandemic has changed that for a while, but we'll get back on track and go up to about 40 trillion kilowatt hours a year. So that's the question. How do you provide that without trashing the planet? And that's the trick. So you need a combination of all non-fossil fuel sources. You can't do it with one or two. You need them all. If you don't do it, you will never reach 40 trillion kilowatt hours from non-fossil fuel.
I see. Sorry. I see a Zoom question from Connie who asks, why isn't the dose rate threshold changed? Why continue with 4 millirem a year limit?
That's politics. That is big time politics. Okay, so there's a couple of reasons, and I've heard many reasons why, but one is, you mean we've been telling everyone for 70 years to be really afraid, and suddenly it's okay? Okay, that's just think of that. Who will believe that? Who will believe the government? Okay, the government suddenly says radiation isn't so bad. I mean, no one would believe it unless Then you have to have a Fauci, right? You have to have someone who's credible telling you, yeah, we really blew it. We have wasted hundreds of billions, probably $1 trillion, dealing with this 4 millirem a year when it should have been 100 millirem a year, which would have been great. I mean, 100 millirem. If background is 300 millirem or up, 100 millirem is fine. I mean, what the heck? And you're only talking about right next to the site. It doesn't increase anything downstream. So, but again, you have to really believe in science. And right now we're having a problem with that. A big problem.
German Military Toys asks, and I'm reinterpreting a little, what will energy look like in 100 years from today, assuming we survive?
We will survive. We are too ornery to die. I'm not kidding. We are just too ornery. Humans will survive. Now, we might have a big dieback of 6-7 billion people, but people will be here. There's no question about it. And if we're smart, we will have a combination of nuclear and renewables. I mean, wind is fine. I mean, in fact, if you're going to build a ton of wind turbines, you need to site them in the right place. You need to site them where they get the most energy per ton of steel, right? That's Tornado Alley. You should never build a wind turbine outside of Tornado Alley, ever, okay? Because Tornado Alley gives you twice as much power per turbine as we get in Washington State, anywhere in Washington State. It's a waste of steel to build a wind turbine in Washington State, okay? So again, there's places that you want to put different sources that make sense, okay? And the one size does not fit all. So you put all wind turbines in Tornado Alley. I mean, even birds about 1 million years ago decided not to migrate through Tornado Alley. Okay? There are no migratory bird routes through Tornado Alley because the wind blows too much. Okay, they're all around there. Okay, and that's a problem with wind turbines. Talking about killing birds, well, you're putting them near migratory routes. What are you doing? Put them in Tornado Alley. You'll get twice as much energy and you won't kill any birds. Now, solar again should be in the Southwest. Any desert basically, because you get more power, tons more power per ton of steel used if you put it in the right place. So if you put wind turbines, Tornado Alley, solar panels in the Southwest, and nuclear pretty much everywhere else, you don't need much. I mean, you can do this. Okay. Now, we're not going to do this. I'm sorry. I hate to say that, but we're not going to do this because we're humans and we tend to be short-sighted, okay? So what's going to happen is if we really want to stave off the worst effects of global warming, we're going to have to do carbon engineering and solar engineering of the atmosphere. Now, I hate messing with the atmosphere, although we have, of course, messed with the atmosphere like crazy already, but we're going to have to do this, the idea of putting fine reflective particulates. It's basically ground up mother of pearl shell is the best stuff. You put it into the upper stratosphere, spreads around the Earth, and it reflects back a certain amount of radiation. We know this works because every time we have a huge volcanic eruption that does just that, global temperature drops 2 degrees for about 3 years until all that comes out. So you have to keep putting it up there every year. It doesn't take much, doesn't cost much. We have to do the research, and UW is one of the leading areas, the leading researchers in this area is at UW. So we just need about 10 years to figure out how to do it right, and then we need to do it because we're not going to do this. We're right now, carbon emissions have dropped about 2% worldwide, but they're going to go back up. I mean, it's just inevitable. And so we can talk about all the stuff, or we can actually do something. So it'll get to the point where it's too bad to ignore, and you're not going to wait 100 years till you have a good mix. You're going to have to do carbon engineering. Now, we can actually pull CO2 out of the atmosphere, very expensive, but we can do that too, but very expensive.
So I see 2 more Zoom questions, and then Chris Bergen chimed in. So I'm going to cut off any more online questions because it is 8:30 almost.
Oh my God.
Constantine asks, is molten salt SMR waste more or less difficult to deal with than traditional waste?
Actually, it's great to deal with because you can separate the fission products from the actinides easily, and you can recycle the actinides and burn them. Okay, so it's actually great, and you minimize the volume of waste more so than any other source. So yeah, molten salt's great. I actually love molten salt, and you can containerize it into small containers, and you can do the deep borehole real easily.
Christopher C. Oh, go ahead on.
Constantine.
Thank you for explanation. I was specifically referring to Thorcon reactors. They're kind of like modular in a way that they send it there, bring it back, and then they got a container with waste. So that's why. Thank you for explanation.
All right. From Christopher C. Bergen on Facebook, if wind and nuclear could be manufactured with clean energy, like nuclear, wouldn't wind be slightly negative in regards to greenhouse gas emissions?
Sure. The problem is, well, this is a great lead into a post I'm going to do in a few weeks. You have to make cement without emitting carbon. That is tough. That is really tough because cement manufacturing is one of the biggest sources of CO2. And when you talk about comparing CO2 like coal is 900 grams per kilowatt emitted, and wind is 14 and nuclear is 14. Those 14 is cement making to build the wind turbine and the nuclear reactor. Okay, so it's all about cement. Now those are very low compared to 900 and 400 for gas. But if you really want to be green, then you're going to have to come up with green manufacturing of cement. And there is a company called Aslan that is just about to do that in Texas. So I will be posting on that in a couple of weeks. So it's kind of neat. Good segue.
Nice. Catherine asks, for those of us who have a science background but not in geology or physics, could you recommend authors in addition to yourself who are good at writing about science and politics of nuclear energy?
That's good. There are some, not many. Okay, and as you know, as I've usually been, scientists don't communicate all that great to non-scientists. I've just had to do it, so I got used to it and I like it. I actually started out at NASA. Now, if you're in planetary science, you know how to communicate, and it's fun to communicate planetary stuff anyway, right? But NASA was always a technology in search of an application, and so we were always taught to talk about it and push it. And yeah, we didn't go to the moon just to get rocks, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's kind of a trick to do that. There are some. Googling is good. If you Google Conca Forbes and then nuclear, I'll come up. And in most of those posts, I have links to other things and other people and reports and things like that. So just Google Conca, CONCA, Forbes, and then whatever subject, nuclear, carbon engineering, it doesn't matter. I'll come right up. I've actually done 500 of these. Can you believe that? I can't believe I've written 500.
Wow. Okay, that'll get me started. Thanks. Thanks.
Good. But you can have my email too, and if Gary, if you want to send out my email, that's fine too.
I have your Forbes page, the page on Forbes that lists your articles and stuff, and that right. has a means of emailing you if I need to, right? I'm
not sure, but if not, I'm all over the place. So you can just Google me and my James Conca email, and it'll probably come up too.
Oh, that's right. It was in your first slide.
Yeah.
That you shared. Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Great. Any other questions? I hope this was useful. Should probably talk next time about Hanford specifically, since that's of interest.
That sounds good. For everybody, I want to thank you, Jim. It's been great. I think we've all enjoyed it.
No, this is great. And it's my first Zoom presentation, so this is cool. I need to do more. So I'll hop online anytime. If you want to set up things, that's great. And I have a bunch of subject areas. It's not just nuclear waste, of course, but nuclear power and the geopolitics of energy in general. Dirty bombs is an interesting subject that no one knows much about, and I'm one of the world's experts in that from my days at Los Alamos. So yeah, and that's kind of a funny thing that no one ever talks about, and it really is self-limiting in a very weird way. You don't need to worry about it because the car bomb will kill more people than the rad. So no matter how much you pack into it. So.
All right, I'm going to cut the broadcast, and anyone who feels like hanging out, we'll just have open mic. Jim, if you have 10 minutes still, that would be amazing. I'm going to say goodbye to the internet now, so let me put on the outro music.
Well, thank you, internet.
Thank you. I'm going to log off. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Good discussion.
So if anybody has topics.